It was a sweltering April afternoon when news outlets first caught wind of the bombshell. From her Texas prison cell, Yolanda Saldívar, once the most reviled woman in music history, had agreed to speak. At 64, behind reinforced glass and surveillance cameras, she had penned a 24-page letter destined for the world beyond high-security fences. The headline alone sent tremors through social media. Yolanda Saldívar breaks her silence. The truth you didn't expect. Across TikTok, X, and late-night news cycles, viewers braced themselves. Would this be a confession, an apology, or yet another calculated ploy? From the start, her missive was steeped in contradictions. Line after line, Saldívar alternated between contrition and self-justification, weaving memories of her decades-long obsession with Selena Quintanilla, her friend, her protégé, her victim. "I never meant for fame to morph into violence," she wrote, her handwriting measured, yet wavering in places. She described early days as Selena's fan club president, tiny meetings in San Antonio banquet halls, pillow-soft whispers of loyalty, the feeling that she and Selena shared a bond no one else could understand. But then she hinted at darker undertones. Envy that grew alongside ticket sales, whispers that Selena shared gratitude with collaborators but overlooked Saldívar's own sacrifices. When the first excerpts hit the wires, shock rippled through Selena's passionate fan base. Some dismissed the letter as an elaborate stunt. Others felt their hearts break all over again, imagining the charms of a friendship turned fatal. Street vendors in Corpus Christi, where Selena was laid to rest, began hawking t-shirts proclaiming, "Too soon, Yolanda." In front of television cameras, tearful admirers clutched roses, demanding, "Why now, after 29 years?" But inside her cell, Saldívar's motives seemed more pragmatic than poetic. According to her legal team, she had spent the last 3 years quietly building her case for a parole hearing scheduled for next summer. Her letter was framed as evidence of remorse and psychological rehabilitation, an explicit bid to demonstrate that the woman who shot a beloved superstar in 1995 had finally confronted her demons. Yet scattered through the narrative were tantalizing references to others present that night, a warning that went unheeded, and a secret Selena entrusted only to me. These fragments sent true crime podcasters into a feeding frenzy, speculating about hidden accomplices or even a broader conspiracy behind Selena's murder. At a hastily called press conference, Selena's sister Suzette Quintanilla rejected any notion of forgiveness. "There is no truth here but one," she said, voice tight as steel. "My sister was betrayed by someone she trusted. That cannot be erased." Legal analysts weighed in, suggesting that the letter, while dramatic, would likely do little to sway a parole board still haunted by the brutality of Saldívar's actions. Her prospects, they argued, remained grim unless she offered incontrovertible new information or concrete evidence of unrevealed co-conspirators. Yet Saldívar's letter wasn't limited to accounts of that fateful day. She detailed decades living under the weight of regret, describing the silent screams that haunted her at night and the letters of hate mail that filled her prison mailbox. She confessed to attempted self-harm, to waking up covered in sweat after nightmares of Selena's final moments, images she insisted she would carry until my bones disappear. Those passages struck an unexpected chord among mental health advocates, who urged the public to consider the human being behind the headlines and the life sentence. Meanwhile, civil rights attorneys argued that if Saldívar could demonstrate genuine psychological healing, verified by prison-designated counselors and post-traumatic stress specialists, her parole bid might no longer be purely legal maneuvering. They highlighted her spotless prison record and her volunteer work mentoring younger inmates. In locked-up dormitories, her story ignited compassionate debates. Was true rehabilitation possible for someone convicted of murdering a cultural icon? Could empathy and accountability ever coexist in the same narrative? As anticipation built toward her scheduled parole hearing, prosecutors prepared to deliver a scathing rebuttal. They planned to showcase chilling security footage from a nearby hospital parking lot, videos that captured Saldívar's furtive movements in the hours before the shooting. They intended to bring forward former prison guards who recounted her refusal to participate in restorative justice programs, painting a portrait of calculation rather than contrition. The world braced for a courtroom showdown pitting emotional testimony against blood-curdling evidence. Through it all, public fascination only intensified. Record-breaking searches for Yolanda Saldívar interview sent mainstream news networks scrambling for every scrap of insight. True crime YouTubers posted dissected analyses of each paragraph, parsing Saldívar's syntax for hidden admissions. Selena loyalty groups convened online to refute every claim she made, from disputed timelines to contested eyewitness accounts. Poetry slams and tribute concerts transformed into impromptu forums for collective grief, anger, and the debated possibility of closure. In the end, as the knocks of justice echo through Texas courtroom hallways, one question looms larger than any other. Will Saldívar's long-awaited silence shatter the narrative once and for all, or will it only deepen the wounds that have festered in the hearts of Selena's fans and family? The letter's most shocking revelation came in a section dated June 12, 2022, when Saldívar claimed she'd discovered a ledger hidden in Selena's tour bus, an encrypted journal that allegedly documented payments, funneled through shell accounts. "I found it under the driver's seat," she wrote, "a black book with bank receipts and initials that weren't mine." According to her account, Selena grew suspicious in early 1995, accusing an insider of skimming merchandise profits. Saldívar insists she warned the singer, but Selena brushed it off as tour stress. These insinuations ignited immediate scrutiny. Could someone besides Saldívar have benefited from those missing funds? True crime podcasters scoured Texas court records for evidence of third-party involvement, while a small contingent of fans circulated theories implicating a disgruntled road manager or even Selena's own accountant. No credible proof has emerged, but the suggestion of a deeper betrayal reopened wounds in the tight-knit Quintanilla circle. Saldívar's letter also offers a clandestine perspective on her final encounter with Selena. She writes that, moments before the fatal shot, Selena pressed her hand to my arm, her eyes pleading, and said, "If you ever need me, I'll always be here." That passage has haunted survivors of the shooting, who recall Selena reaching out in shock and confusion immediately before collapsing. Forensic experts contacted by major networks have weighed in on the plausibility of Saldívar's claim. While the single bullet entered at close range, the soft tissue damage pattern could align with a sudden, unanticipated embrace. Whether that detail lends new context or remains a desperate attempt at empathy, it has prompted the Texas Rangers to review archived autopsy photos and revisit the crime scene transcripts. Another startling admission addresses Saldívar's psychological state in the days following Selena's death. In contrast to prior statements asserting her clarity of mind, she now confesses to a dissociative fog during her initial confession. "I remember nothing of my suicide attempt that night," she wrote. "I woke in a hospital bed chained to the wall, my own blood beneath me." Prison psychologists confirm that dissociative amnesia can occur after traumatic events, yet attorneys for the state contend that her meticulous instructions to call an ambulance and to admit guilt immediately afterward indicate full awareness. This clinical dichotomy between self-reported blackout and cold-blooded execution has become a focal point in legal briefs opposing her parole, with prosecutors arguing her memory lapse is a manipulative ploy rather than genuine trauma. Saldívar's letter next tackles an abrupt pivot: her support for a memorial concert to benefit the Selena Foundation. "I volunteer to work backstage," she offers, "to decorate the stage, to carry equipment, to earn penance one day at a time." The proposal stunned Selena's philanthropic family, who have consistently refused any collaboration with her. Suzette Quintanilla issued a statement calling the idea repugnant, arguing that Saldívar's penitence should be private, not a public spectacle. Meanwhile, the Selena Foundation's president released a firm rejection. "We will never share a stage with her, nor approve her presence at our events." Yet some legal analysts believe this overt willingness to serve might sway parole commissioners, demonstrating tangible efforts to atone. Saldívar's team has circulated letters of endorsement from prison ministers and volunteer coordinators, each praising her consistent work ethic and genuine remorse. The letter also revisits the long-debated issue of whether Saldívar acted alone. She describes a brief exchange she overheard between two tour staff members on the night of the shooting. an argument about a misplaced briefcase that snapped the tension in the air. She suggests the true motive may have centered on Selena refusing to reinstate her as business manager after discovering the financial discrepancies. That claim reanimated legal historians to pore over sealed depositions and backstage call logs in search of corroboration. Although no official reinvestigation has been launched, the Ambrose Center for Forensic Studies in Houston announced plans to archive new witness interviews under a grant partly funded by fan contributions. Public reaction has grown increasingly polarized. Thousands have signed an online petition demanding Selena's murderer remain in prison for life, while a smaller faction, mostly criminal justice reform advocates, cites the letter as evidence of Saldívar's transformation. Commentators on cable news panels argue over whether genuine rehabilitation should outweigh the gravity of premeditated murder. Meanwhile, mental health organizations have called on the public to consider the possibility that Saldívar's decades in isolation may have fostered both self-reflection and genuine regret. As the parole hearing date approaches, both sides are intensifying their campaigns. Victim advocacy groups plan a candlelit vigil outside the Texas Parole Board offices, chanting "Never Again" slogans. Opponents of her release are collecting supporters' signatures to fill dozens of oversized binders, each stamped with Selena's smiling image. Conversely, Saldívar's legal team convened a pre-hearing press conference where they read letters from inmates describing her mentorship in anger management classes, from prison educators citing her volunteerism, and from faith leaders testifying to her spiritual rebirth. Whether Saldívar's 24-page confession will tip the scales in her favor remains to be seen. One fact is sure: the world's perception of Selena's final hours, and of Saldívar herself, will never be the same. As the legal arguments crystallize and emotions run high, the letter stands as both a plea and a provocation. A complex testament from a woman once idolized, then detested, now wrestling with the ghosts of her own memories. Saldívar's missive didn't simply restate old accusations and regrets. It unveiled nebulous new details that criminal investigators now admit could reopen dormant inquiries. She asserts that in the weeks before the shooting, she received threatening phone calls from an unnamed woman claiming knowledge of Selena's private medical condition and demanding hush money. "I handed my phone to Selena once so she heard the breathing on the line," Saldívar wrote. "She laughed it off, but I saw the fear in her eyes." That anecdote prompted a 3-hour closed-door session with the original case investigators, who scoured archived phone records for any unusual incoming calls to Selena's personal line in March and April of 1995. Although no confirmed threats had been documented at the time, law enforcement sources tell us that an internal review has flagged several anonymous calls now awaiting forensic re-examination. Perhaps most explosive was Saldívar's suggestion she wasn't alone the evening of March 31st, 1995. "I walked Selena to her car with someone's silhouette trailing behind us," she confessed. Sleek shadows from an adjacent street lamp, she claimed, concealed another figure who vanished as the shooting occurred. While earlier theories hinted at a third-party presence, this is the first time Saldívar has alleged direct complicity or even mere attendance by a bystander. Private investigators hired by Selena's family have petitioned the parole board to grant them access to the original security tapes from the motel's parking lot, a move the board has yet to approve. These tapes, experts say, could confirm whether suspicious individuals circled the area that night. Psychiatric assessments appended to her letter underscore the paradox of Saldívar's mental state. Licensed forensic psychologist Dr. Henry Molina provided a 47-page evaluation citing Saldívar's consistent reports of remorse, her willingness to undergo cognitive behavioral therapy, and her role as a de facto mentor in the prison's anger management group. Yet Molina also notes her propensity for self-aggrandizing narratives, warning that memory distortions can accompany long-term incarceration and obsessive rumination. In legal filings, opposing counsel highlight Molina's cautionary footnotes, arguing that her newly vivid recollections, particularly of a hidden profiler and coded financial records, may reflect a constructed narrative rather than concrete fact. On the parole board's preparatory docket, Saldívar's attorneys have submitted dozens of letters from prison staff and fellow inmates, each testifying to her positive conduct. They include heartfelt accounts from younger prisoners whose anger and despair she helped alleviate through personal counseling sessions. But victims' advocates have mobilized just as fiercely, deriding these testimonials as manipulative tropes in a perfunctory rehabilitation script. Outside the board's chambers, activists have launched the hashtag #NoParoleForYolanda, amassing over 1 million retweets in just 48 hours. Panels on cable news compare her plea to those of other high-profile inmates, dissecting the boundaries between earned redemption and unforgivable offense. Selena's legacy looms large over both sides of the debate. Fans have begun circulating the Creed of Cumbia, a compilation of Selena's own quotes about forgiveness and faith, then contrasting them with Saldívar's escalating self-defense. Religious leaders, summoned to weigh in on Saldívar's spiritual reform, have provided mixed endorsements. Some parish priests praise her vow of penance, while others lament her repeated references to divine justification as evidence of self-centered contrition. In a rare joint appearance, Selena's father Abraham and sister Suzette delivered a unified statement. They would never accept her parole unless she disclosed every name and motive associated with the alleged financial conspiracy. "We seek closure," they said, face set but voice measured, not vengeance. International legal observers are watching closely. The concept of restorative justice has gained traction in other jurisdictions, and Saldívar's high-profile case is now frequently cited in articles and symposiums on reform. In Canada, a parole board representative admitted that Saldívar's powerful letter has inspired considerations of more lenient release terms tied to documented community service and genuine remorse. Yet the gravity of her crime, involving betrayal by a trusted confidant and the murder of a cultural icon, remains a stark counterpoint to the notion of rehabilitation. As the hearing date nears, both legal teams are preparing final briefs. Saldívar's counsel plans to present video testimony from prison chaplains and to highlight her spotless conduct over 29 years. Opposing counsel intends to call Selena's former bodyguard and a retired Texas Ranger, both of whom maintain that Saldívar's memory remains unreliable and self-serving. They will emphasize that her letter's new allegations, while salacious, have never been substantiated by independent witnesses. Between these dueling strategies, the public is left to wonder whether this latest chapter will rewrite history or simply reopen wounds. Will the promise of parole hinge on her newfound disclosures of financial subterfuge and phantom witnesses? Or will the board see through the haze of fresh insinuations to the unalterable facts of the 1995 conviction? In the end, Saldívar's letter, rich in drama and paradox, has transformed her silence into the most consequential testimony in her fight for freedom, and left the world waiting to see whether justice will permit her release or demand that her silence endure forever. Outside the parole hearing room in Huntsville, Texas, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Reporters jostled for position behind barricades, flashing cameras toward the locked doors. Inside, board members pored over binders stuffed with Saldívar's 29-year prison record, her letter, and the torrent of new allegations. Each page bleeds with competing emotions: remorse and retraction, confession and conspiracy, forcing the commissioners to weigh every word against the enduring trauma Selena's family still carries. In the courtroom lobby, two distinct crowds pressed signs through chain-link fences. On one side, survivors of violence and crime victims advocates chanted "Justice for Selena," clutching photos of a beaming Quintanilla. Their voices echoed off the corridor walls, suffused with sorrow and righteous fury. On the other side, a small contingent of restorative justice supporters and prison reform activists held banners reading "Rehabilitation works" and "Let forgiveness lead." They argued Saldívar's documented remorse and prison outreach justified at least a parole review. Strangers debated on sidewalks, each conviction as ardent as a cathedral sermon. At the front of the courtroom, the board chairwoman cleared her throat and called the session to order. The first hour passed in procedural formalities until Saldívar's legal team stood and delivered a final plea. Her attorney's voice quavered as he recounted decades of quiet service, tutoring illiterate inmates, organizing grief counseling sessions for families of incarcerated mothers, even leading prison Bible studies. He emphasized her spotless disciplinary record, the dozens of certificates pinned to her cell wall, and the flood of letters from those she'd helped. Jurors saw behind him a life measured by regret and repentance. Then the state's prosecutor rose. He unfurled detailed diagrams of motel parking lot angles, pointing to positions where Saldívar's own letter now placed an unnamed third party. He argued that her new claims were desperate smokescreens, aimed at muddying the waters and diminishing her lone actor culpability. He reminded the commissioners that Saldívar had shot Selena at point-blank range, leaving no room for an unseen accomplice. He produced expert testimony on memory reliability, citing studies showing that false memories can emerge from repeated rehearsals of invented narratives. His closing line resonated like gospel thunder. True remorse doesn't hatch conspiracies, it honors truth. As the board adjourned for closed deliberations, Selena's family sat in the front row. Abraham pinched the bridge of his nose. Suzette's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and Aby crossed his arms in tight resolve. The three of them would be allowed to deliver final victim impact statements later in the day. Their presence alone underscored the gravity of what was at stake: a woman's freedom versus a sister's shattered heart. In the hallway outside, a camera crew for a forthcoming Netflix documentary on Selena's legacy set up overhead rigs. The series, originally slated for release in 2025, had rushed to insert an episode on Saldívar's letter and the parole hearing. One filmmaker confided that they hoped to capture that split-second moment when the board announced its decision, whether to grant a new hearing, a reduced sentence, or an outright denial that would reaffirm Saldívar's infamy. Meanwhile, true crime podcasters live-streamed their reactions, speculating on which side would prevail. Her claims of financial subterfuge could open new leads. One host said, fingers tapping a tablet. If the board takes those seriously, we could see an actual reopening of the case. Another countered, they'll reject them. Judges don't like hearsay. Subscribers' comments streamed in real time, a digital chorus of fear, hope, and morbid fascination. Back inside, the board reconvened. Chairwoman Martinez tapped her gavel, and Saldívar was escorted in, shackles replaced by her pale linen shirt and a placid expression that betrayed none of the storm outside. She sat, hands folded, chin raised, eyes flicking toward the faces of those she once called family. The room crackled as the board read its final ruling. She would receive a formal parole review in 90 days, contingent on presenting verifiable proof of her alleged conspirator and a detailed forensic audit of the missing financial records. The decision stunned both camps. Victims' advocates erupted in boos. Reformers cheered, tears streaking their cheeks. Selena's family declined to comment until they'd reviewed the ruling. Suzette's trembling lips formed a silent no. Outside, the news broke on every screen. Hashtags like hashtag no parole for Yolanda trended again, but so did hashtag review for truth. Reporters captured Saldívar's first public words in decades. I accept the board's call for proof. I stand ready to fully cooperate. On the courthouse steps, a raw tension held the crowd in place. Some yelled for her release. Others threatened lawsuits. Yet in the cacophony, one truth emerged. The saga of Selena's death was far from over. Saldívar's silence had shattered into fragments of memory and allegation, and now each would be scrutinized under the unforgiving glare of justice. 4. Selena's millions of fans. Nothing could ever bring her back. But in ordering a new hearing, the parole board had unlocked a door to fresh revelations, promising that the true reason why Yolanda Saldívar waited so long to speak may finally come to light. For better or worse, in the days following the parole board's shock ruling, a whirlwind of activity enveloped both camps. Saldívar's attorneys immediately set to work assembling the materials they'd need to substantiate her claims. Forensic accountants were hired to sift through decades of Selena's financial statements, looking for discrepancies that might align with Saldívar's alleged shell accounts. Private investigators pored over scrapings of motel parking lot pavement in the hope of uncovering latent fingerprints, while a small team of crime scene photographers petitioned the board for sealed access to original bullet casings and ballistic reports. Saldívar herself remained detained in the high-security women's unit at Mountain View, but her cell block buzzed with purpose. Fellow inmates, some seeing a path to reduced sentences through cooperation, offered to testify about her decades of goodwill work. Saldívar's late-night planning sessions were chronicled by her new legal counsel, who claimed she now slept fitfully, haunted by the enormity of what lay ahead. Meanwhile, Selena's family and supporters mobilized to counter every step. A parallel legal brief was drafted, arguing that any inquiry into third-party involvement was a distraction from the irrefutable fact that Saldívar, and only Saldívar, had pulled the trigger. Dozens of victim impact statements arrived, some from childhood friends of Selena who described growing up with her gentle voice, and others from admirers who'd only discovered her music posthumously but felt the wound as deeply. Selena's father filed a motion to bar the release of any additional security footage, arguing that even if it showed another presence, it would only serve to traumatize anyone who watched it, rather than deliver justice. Suzette Quintanilla's legal team followed with a defamation suit against any media outlet that suggested Selena's own family had been complicit, a claim Saldívar had floating in her letter when she insinuated Selena might have known about financial misdeeds. Public sentiment fractured into competing factions. On social media platforms, arteries of outrage and empathy throbbed side by side. Hashtag campaigns demolished one another's reach. Hashtag No Truth No Parole garnered tens of thousands of retweets in a single afternoon, while hashtag Hear Her Claim amassed hundreds of thousands more in a show of solidarity with Saldívar's right to a fair hearing. Polls conducted by Texas Tribune and major networks showed a near-even split. Roughly 47% of respondents favored upholding the conviction without parole, while 43% believed her additional testimony merited a full reinvestigation. The remaining 10% remained undecided, caught between loyalty to Selena's memory and questions of due process. Legal analysts compared the situation to other high-profile parole bids where new evidence surfaced decades after a conviction. Cases involving latent DNA samples, recanting witnesses, or novel forensic techniques. They noted that the Texas Parole Board rarely grants reviews solely on unverified allegations, yet the board's unusual decision to reopen Saldívar's file signaled extraordinary circumstances. Some speculated that the board may have been swayed by her spotless disciplinary record, her decades-long volunteer work, and the high-profile nature of her case. Others contended that politics played a role. With an upcoming gubernatorial election, the board's ruling might curry favor with voters wary of perceived harshness in the criminal justice system. Complicating matters was Saldívar's evolving mental health testimony. She voluntarily agreed to a battery of neurological exams, including MRI scans and neuropsychological assessments, to substantiate her claims of trauma-induced amnesia and dissociation at the time of the shooting. Reports from prison psychiatrists were mixed. Some found credible signs of extreme stress under which false memories can form, while others saw no clinical basis for her selective recollections of hidden conspirators. The conflicting opinions became fodder for academic symposia on memory reliability, events streamed online by brain science institutes. One prominent neuroscientist suggested that if Saldívar's narrative was demonstrably false, it could undermine legitimate findings about trauma and amnesia that had important implications for countless survivors of violence. Within Selena's fan community, grief counselors offered free hotline support, anticipating that renewed media attention would reopen emotional scars. Online memorial groups shared coping resources, curated playlists of Selena's greatest hits, and articles on the impact of false narratives on collective memory. In Texas high schools, teachers reported students writing essays on the difference between remembrance and rumor, using Saldívar's case to discuss media literacy and the ethics of true crime entertainment. As the 90-day review deadline neared, both sides prepared for a climactic courtroom showdown. Saldívar's lawyers filed motions to subpoena the prison's audio recordings of her counseling sessions, eager to demonstrate a pattern of genuine remorse and self-reflection. Prosecutors countered with motions to exclude uncorroborated letters from inmates, citing hearsay rules and potential bias. The parole board schedule filled with preliminary hearings, expert depositions, and procedural hearings, each step subject to live blogging by accredited journalists. The entire process promised to be the most transparent parole proceeding in Texas history, broadcast live on public access channels for the first time. Through it all, Selena's name remained the unspoken anchor. Each renewed debate invoked her legacy, the telenovela themes of her final album, the cross-cultural resonance of her songs, and the communal sense of loss she left behind. Whatever the parole board ultimately decides, the world now regards that tragic March day in Corpus Christi through an expanded lens, one that blends old wounds with new questions, sorrow with the hope of truth, and eternal memory with the possibility of hidden secrets finally coming to light. The board's decision to grant a formal parole review unleashed a torrent of activity on both sides of the debate. Over the next 90 days, investigators re-examined Selena's financial records with forensic accounting teams, tracing every royalty check and merchandise invoice. Although they uncovered minor bookkeeping errors, common in the 1990s music industry, they found no evidence of illicit shell accounts or third-party beneficiaries. Saldívar's claim of hidden ledgers under the tour bus seat remained unsubstantiated, and the board's appetite for conspiracy theories appeared to wane. Meanwhile, the hunt for corroborating witnesses in the motel parking lot stalled. Court orders to preserve and enhance the original security footage returned low-resolution images too grainy to identify extra figures. Expert video analysts conceded that the tapes likely degraded over decades, and no new fingerprints could be lifted from archived evidence. With each fruitless inquiry, Saldívar's narrative lost momentum, shifting public attention toward her decades-long prison record and the question of whether genuine remorse outweighed the gravity of her crime. Selena's family seized the moment to press their own emotional case. In a joint press conference, Suzette and A.B. Quintanilla delivered poignant victim impact statements. Suzette's voice cracked as she recalled childhood memories of Selena humming lullabies. A.B. spoke quietly, but firmly about the void his sister's death left in their community. Their presence before the parole board reminded commissioners of the human cost. A life cut short at 23, a family forever changed. When they finished, silence filled the room, broken only by the soft click of microphones being muted. Public reaction mirrored the board's mixed signals. Critics who had championed Saldívar's right to be heard began to question whether her letter had been more manipulative than meaningful. Hashtags like #ParoleDenied trended alongside #JusticeForSelena. In a brutal irony, the same social media platforms that had amplified her plea now amplified outrage at any suggestion of her release. Meanwhile, justice reform advocates acknowledged that the novel approach of granting a review on new allegations had backfired, reinforcing the perception that parole boards could be swayed by sensational claims rather than evidence. Psychiatrists and neuroscientists weighed in on the memory amnesia debate, publishing op-eds that dissected the feasibility of dissociative fugue in violent offenders. While some experts affirmed that extreme trauma can fracture memory, others argued that Saldívar's selective recollections, omitting any admission of jealousy or premeditation, pointed to self-serving fabrication. Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia of Texas cited the case during a hearing on criminal justice reform, using it as an example of how parole guidelines might need clearer standards for evaluating post-conviction disclosures. As the final hearing approached, Saldívar's defense team presented one last piece of evidence: testimonials from inmates she had mentored, describing her as the heart of compassion in the prison community. They argued that her decades of volunteer work demonstrated a transformed character deserving of release. But the state countered with stark reminders of the premeditated nature of Selena's murder, emphasizing that no quantity of good deeds could erase a life lost. In closing arguments, prosecutors recited Selena's own words about trust and betrayal, leaving board members to consider whether forgiveness had limits. On the day of reckoning, the parole board reconvened with the same solemnity that had marked earlier sessions. Family members attended in person, flanked by legal counsel and silent bodyguards. Saldívar, wearing the same pale linen shirt from earlier hearings, sat with clasped hands and a placid expression. When the chairwoman delivered the verdict, denying parole without the possibility of another review, the room erupted in controlled relief. Selena's fans wept. Saldívar quietly bowed her head, the earliest sign of visible emotion in weeks. The board cited the lack of new, verifiable evidence and the enduring impact of her crime as reasons for maintaining her life sentence. In the aftermath, media coverage shifted toward reflection. Commentators lauded the board's adherence to evidence-based decision-making, while lamenting the pain the entire process had inflicted on Selena's loved ones. Selena's family released a statement expressing gratitude for the board's courage to stand by truth, and urging the public to honor her sister's legacy by supporting emerging Latino artists and charitable causes Selena had championed. Saldívar, now destined to remain behind bars, issued a brief written response. I accept the board's decision and will continue to seek forgiveness in any way I can. Prison officials reported that she returned to her duties mentoring fellow inmates, her cell block once again abuzz with plans for holiday fundraisers and literacy workshops. Ultimately, Yolanda Saldívar's long-awaited confession and the parole board's review became more than a legal saga. They served as a crucible for questions about memory, remorse, and the enduring power of a victim's legacy. Although the world watched her break her silence and brandish fresh allegations, the final chapter reaffirmed that justice, like memory, is a complex blend of fact, accountability, and the inescapable weight of a life ended too soon.